Imagine this: a room buzzing with the energy of the elite, champagne flutes clinking, laughter echoing off the walls, and the air thick with secrets. In the midst of it all, a bartender, someone most people wouldn't even glance at twice, does something so bold, so unexpected, that it sends shockwaves through the entire room. A kiss. Not just any kiss, but one that lands on the lips of one of the most powerful men in the city. A tycoon. A man who controls empires with a single phone call. And his reaction? It's not what anyone expects. Not even you. Welcome to a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. A tale of power, desire, and the kind of moment that changes lives forever. If you've ever wondered what it's like to witness something so shocking that it leaves everyone speechless, you're in the right place. By the end of this video, you'll have the answers to the questions burning in your mind. Why did she do it? What happens next? And how does this one moment unravel the lives of everyone involved? Stick around because this is a story you won't want to miss. Let's set the scene. It's a glamorous charity gala in the heart of New York City, the kind of event where the rich and powerful gather to see and be seen. The room is a sea of designer gowns, tailored suits, and million-dollar smiles. But amidst all the glitz and glamour, there's one person who doesn't quite fit in. Her name is Clara, a bartender with a sharp wit, a mysterious past, and a look in her eyes that suggests she's seen more of the world than most people in this room ever will. She's the kind of person who blends into the background, unnoticed and underestimated. But tonight, she's about to step into the spotlight in a way no one could have predicted. On the other side of the room stands Alexander Kane, the tycoon. He's the kind of man who commands attention without even trying. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a presence so magnetic that people instinctively part ways when he walks by. He's built an empire from the ground up, a self-made billionaire with a reputation for being ruthless in business and untouchable in his personal life. But there's something about him tonight, a tension in his jaw, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes that suggests not everything is as perfect as it seems. The moment happens so quickly that most people in the room don't even realize it at first. Clara, carrying a tray of drinks, weaves her way through the crowd with the ease of someone who's spent years navigating chaos. She stops in front of Alexander, and for a split second, their eyes meet. There's something electric in that glance, a connection that defies explanation. And then, without warning, she leans in and kisses him. Not a peck on the cheek, not a polite gesture, but a full-on, no-holds-barred kiss that leaves everyone in the room stunned. The room falls silent. Glasses stop clinking. Conversations die mid-sentence. All eyes are on Alexander, waiting for his reaction. Will he push her away? Call security? Or worse? But what happens next is something no one could have predicted. His reaction is so unexpected, so out of character that it sends a ripple of shock through the room. And that's just the beginning. Because this kiss isn't just a moment, it's the spark that ignites a chain of events that will change everything. Now I know what you're thinking. Why would a bartender risk everything to kiss a man like Alexander Kane? What could possibly drive her to do something so bold, so reckless? And what does this mean for both of them? These are the questions that will keep you hooked, the mysteries that will unfold as we dive deeper into this story. But here's the thing, this isn't just a story about a kiss. It's a story about power, about secrets, and about the lengths people will go to when they're pushed to the edge. It's about the masks we wear and the truths we hide, even from ourselves. As we peel back the layers of this story, you'll meet characters who are as complex as they are captivating. There's Clara, the bartender with a past she's desperate to outrun. There's Alexander, the tycoon who seems to have it all but is hiding a vulnerability no one knows about. And then there's the cast of supporting players, friends, rivals, and enemies who all have a role to play in this unfolding drama. Each of them has secrets, each of them has motives, and each of them will be affected by what happens next. But here's the master move. I'm not going to give you all the answers right away. This story is a journey, one that's meant to be savored, one twist at a time. I want you to feel the tension, to experience the shock, to wonder what's going to happen next. And I promise you this, by the end of this video, you'll have the answers you're looking for. But getting there? That's where the magic happens. So, are you ready to dive into a world where nothing is as it seems? Are you ready to uncover the truth behind that kiss? To see how one moment can change everything? If you are, then keep watching. Because this is just the beginning. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. But before we go any further, let me ask you this. What would you do if you were in Clara's shoes? Would you have the courage to take that risk, to make that move, knowing it could change your life forever? Think about it as we dive deeper into this story. Because by the end of this video, you might just find yourself seeing the world and the people in it in a whole new way. And now, without further ado, let's get to the heart of the story. Because what happens next is something you'll be talking about long after the video ends. Stay tuned as the echoes of the kiss reverberated through the room. The tension was palpable. A living, breathing entity that seemed to tighten its grip with every passing second. Claire stepped back, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Her hands trembled slightly, but she held her ground, her gaze locked on Alexander's. For a moment, time stood still. The room, filled with the city's most influential figures, was frozen in shock, their collective breath held as they waited for the tycoon's reaction. Alexander's expression was unreadable, a mask of calm that betrayed nothing of the storm raging beneath the surface. But then something shifted. His lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile that didn't reach his eyes but was enough to send a shiver down Clara's spine. It wasn't the reaction anyone expected, least of all Clara. She had braced herself for anger, for humiliation, for the cold dismissal that would confirm her worst fears. But this? This was something else entirely. To understand the gravity of this moment, we need to step back and unravel the threads that brought Clara and Alexander to this point. Clara wasn't just a bartender. She was a woman with a past that haunted her every step. Growing up in a small town where opportunities were scarce, she had learned early on that life wasn't fair. Her father, a gambler with a penchant for losing more than he could afford, had left the family drowning in debt. Her mother, worn down by years of struggle, had turned to alcohol to numb the pain. Claire had been the glue holding everything together, working multiple jobs to keep the lights on and food on the table. But it wasn't just the financial burden that weighed on her. It was the constant fear of being discovered, of someone finding out the truth about her family's shame. When she finally left her hometown, she vowed to leave her past behind and start anew. But some scars run too deep to fade. Alexander Kane, on the other hand, was a man who seemed to have it all. Born into wealth, he had expanded his family's fortune into a global empire, his name synonymous with power and success. But behind the polished exterior was a man who had learned to guard his heart as fiercely as he guarded his business. His rise to the top hadn't been without cost. Betrayals, broken relationships, and the weight of expectations had shaped him into the man he was today, a man who trusted no one and let few people get close. His marriage, a carefully orchestrated alliance with the daughter of a rival tycoon, was more of a business arrangement than a union of love. His wife, Evelyn, was beautiful, intelligent, and as calculating as he was. Together, they were the perfect power couple, but behind closed doors, their relationship was a cold, distant affair. Alexander had long since accepted that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. Or so he thought. The kiss wasn't just a random act of impulsiveness. It was the culmination of weeks of tension, of stolen glances and unspoken words. Claire had first noticed Alexander at a previous event, where he had been the guest of honor. There was something about him that drew her in, something beyond the wealth and the power. She had seen the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, the way he seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. It was a vulnerability she recognized, one that mirrored her own. Over the weeks, their paths had crossed more frequently, and each time, the connection between them grew stronger. It wasn't just physical attraction, it was something deeper, something neither of them could quite put into words. But Clara knew the risks. Alexander was a man who lived in the public eye, a man whose every move was scrutinized. To get involved with him would be to invite chaos into her life. And yet, she couldn't help herself. The night of the gala, something had shifted. Claire had been working the event, blending into the background as usual, when she overheard a conversation that stopped her in her tracks. Two men, both high-profile businessmen, were discussing Alexander in hushed tones. They spoke of a deal gone wrong, of a betrayal that had left Alexander vulnerable. One of them mentioned a name, Evelyn. Clara's heart raced. And co-worker at the diner, who had her own reasons for being wary of Alexander. Sarah had always been protective of Emily, and she didn't trust the billionaire one bit. She had seen the way he looked at Emily, the way he seemed to know things about her that he shouldn't, and she was determined to find out what he was hiding. But the more she dug, the more she realized that Alexander wasn't the only one with something to hide. There were others, people who didn't want Emily to know the truth. People who would do whatever it took to keep their secrets buried. And then there was the diner itself, which seemed to hold secrets of its own. Emily had always felt a strange connection to the place, as if it were somehow tied to her past. But every time she tried to dig deeper, she hit a wall. The owner, an elderly man named Joe, was tight-lipped about the diner's history, and the townspeople seemed to know even less. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important about the diner, something that held the key to the mystery surrounding Alexander and the strange events that had been happening since he came into her life. As the tension between Emily and Alexander grew, so did the stakes. The more she learned about him, the more she realized that he wasn't just a man with secrets, he was a man with a mission. A mission that involved her in ways she couldn't yet understand. And as much as she wanted to trust him, she couldn't ignore the feeling that she was being pulled into a web of lies and deception. But the question was, who was lying? And what were they trying to hide? The story was far from over, and the answers were still out of reach. But one thing was certain, Emily's life would never be the same. The question was, would she be able to handle the truth when it finally came out? Or would it destroy everything she had worked so hard to build? The answers were coming, but not yet. Not until the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. And when it did, it would change everything. But until then, the mystery remained, and the tension continued to build. Because in a story like this, nothing is ever as it seems. And the truth? The truth is always more complicated than it appears. The tension between Emily and Alexander reached a boiling point one stormy night, the kind of night where the rain lashed against the windows and the wind howled like a warning. They were sitting in his penthouse suite, the city lights flickering below like distant stars, when Emily finally confronted him. She had been piecing together the fragments of his story, the inconsistencies in his words, the way he always seemed to evade her questions. And then there were the things she had discovered on her own, the old newspaper clippings she found hidden in his study, the faded photograph of a woman who looked eerily like her, the cryptic notes that seemed to hint at a past he was desperate to keep buried. She demanded answers, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. But instead of giving her the truth, Alexander did something she never expected. He walked away. Just like that. No explanation, no apology. Just silence. Emily was left reeling, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Who was the woman in the photograph? What was Alexander hiding? And why did she feel like she was at the center of a game she didn't understand? But before she could process what had happened, something even more unexpected occurred. The next morning, as she was opening the diner, she found a letter slipped under the door. It was addressed to her, written in a handwriting she didn't recognize. The message was short but chilling. You're closer to the truth than you think. But be careful. Not everyone wants you to find it. Emily's hands shook as she read the words, her heart pounding in her chest. Someone was watching her. Someone who knew more about her than they should. And they were warning her to stop digging. But why? What were they afraid she would find? Meanwhile, Sarah's investigation into Alexander was taking a dangerous turn. She had been following leads, talking to people who knew him, and piecing together a picture of a man who was far more complicated than he appeared. She discovered that Alexander's rise to wealth and power hadn't been as straightforward as the media made it seem. There were rumors of shady business deals, of people who had crossed him and disappeared without a trace. And then there was the woman in the photograph, a woman named Clara, who had been Alexander's fiancée 8 years ago. Clara had vanished under mysterious circumstances, and no one had seen or heard from her since. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Clara's disappearance was connected to Emily, but she didn't know how. And the more she dug, the more she realized that she was in over her head. Because someone didn't want her to find the truth. Someone who was willing to do whatever it took to keep it buried. As Emily tried to... her spine. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander hesitated, his eyes scanning the balcony as if he expected someone to appear at any moment. "You were right to warn me," he said finally, his tone softer now, almost apologetic. "But you've put yourself in danger by doing so. If they find out you know he stopped himself," his jaw clenching as if he were fighting to keep his emotions in check. "Just go. Please." Clara's mind was reeling, 1,000 questions swirling in her head. Who were they? What had she stumbled into? And why was Alexander so afraid? But before she could ask, the sound of footsteps echoed from inside, the door to the balcony creaking open as a figure stepped out. It was Evelyn, her expression calm but her eyes sharp, like a predator sizing up its prey. "There you are," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I've been looking everywhere for you." The tension between the three of them was palpable, a silent battle of wills that seemed to stretch on forever. Evelyn's gaze flicked to Claire, her smile never wavering but her eyes cold and calculating. "And who's this?" she asked, her tone light but laced with something darker. Alexander stepped forward, his body subtly shielding Clara from his wife's scrutiny. "No one," he said, his voice firm. "Just a bartender who got lost on her way out." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, her smile widening as if she knew something he didn't. "Is that so?" she said, her gaze lingering on Clara for a moment longer before turning back to Alexander. "Well, we have guests waiting. Shall we?" Alexander hesitated, his eyes meeting Clara's for a brief moment before he nodded. "Of course," he said, his tone carefully neutral. But as he turned to follow Evelyn back inside, he glanced over his shoulder, his eyes locking with Clara's one last time. The message was clear. This wasn't over. As the door closed behind them, Clara felt a wave of panic wash over her. She didn't know what to do, where to go, or who to trust. But one thing was certain, she couldn't stay here. Taking a deep breath, she slipped back inside, her mind racing as she tried to blend into the crowd. But as she made her way through the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every glance, every whisper seemed to be directed at her, and she couldn't tell if it was just her imagination or if she was truly in danger. As she reached the exit, she glanced back one last time, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of Alexander or Evelyn. But they were gone, swallowed up by the sea of faces. And as she stepped out into the night, she couldn't help but wonder if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit corner of the gala, a man stood watching the scene unfold with a cold, calculating gaze. He was tall, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. His name was Victor Langston, a rival tycoon with a reputation for being as ruthless as he was ambitious. He had been watching Alexander for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, thanks to the bartender's little stunt, he had found it. A slow smile spread across his face as he pulled out his phone, sending a quick message to his associates. "It's time," he wrote, his fingers tapping against the screen. "Move in." As he slipped his phone back into his pocket, his gaze lingered on the door Claire had just exited through. She didn't know it yet, but she had just become a pawn in a game far bigger than she could have ever imagined. And in this game, there were no second chances. Back at the Kane estate, Alexander paced the length of his study, his mind racing as he tried to piece together what had just happened. Evelyn sat across from him, her expression calm but her eyes sharp, watching him like a hawk. "You're playing a dangerous game," she said finally, her voice cutting through the silence. Alexander stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing as he turned to face her. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his tone carefully controlled. Evelyn smiled, a cold, knowing smile that sent a chill down his spine. "Don't play dumb, Alexander," she said. "I know what you're up to. And if you think you can outsmart me, you're sorely mistaken." Alexander's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "This isn't about you," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is about survival. And if you get in my way, I won't hesitate to take you down with me." Evelyn's smile never wavered, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, fear, perhaps. Or maybe just the realization that she had underestimated him. "We'll see," she said softly, standing up and smoothing out her dress. "But remember, Alexander, in this game, there are no winners. Only survivors." As the door closed behind her, Alexander sank into his chair, his mind racing as he tried to figure out his next move. He knew he was running out of time, that the walls were closing in around him. But he also knew that he couldn't give up. Not now. Not when so much was at stake. And as he reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen, he couldn't help but think of Clara. She was in danger, and it was his fault. He had dragged her into this mess, and now he had to find a way to get her out. But with enemies on all sides and time running out, he wasn't sure if he could save her or himself. The game was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. But one thing was certain, the next move would change everything. And as the clock ticked down, Alexander knew that he was running out of options. The question was, would it be enough? Or was he already too late? The answers to those questions would come, but not yet. Because the story was far from over, and the twists and turns were just beginning. The night was far from over, and the storm that had been brewing for weeks was finally about to break. Alexander sat in his study, the weight of the world pressing down on him as he stared at his phone, the screen glowing faintly in the dim light. He knew what he had to do, but the cost of his next move would be steep. Clara was out there, somewhere in the city, unaware of the danger closing in around her. He couldn't let her become collateral damage in a war she had never asked to be part of. But time was running out, and every second he hesitated brought her closer to the edge of disaster. With a deep breath, he made the call, his voice steady but laced with urgency as he issued a series of commands to his most trusted associates. "Find her," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And keep her safe, no matter what." As he ended the call, he felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by the knowledge that the real battle was just beginning. Across the city, Clara wandered the streets, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. She didn't know where to go or who to turn to, but she knew she couldn't go home. Not yet. The encounter on the balcony had left her shaken, and the look in Alexander's eyes had told her everything she needed to know. She was in over her head. As she turned a corner, she noticed a black sedan idling at the curb, its windows tinted and its engine purring softly. Before she could react, the door opened and a man stepped out, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. "Claire," he said, his voice low and steady. "We need to talk." She froze, her heart pounding as she recognized him, Victor Langston, the man she had overheard at the gala. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that sent a chill down her spine. "Don't be afraid," he said, gesturing toward the car. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to make you an offer." Claire hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to run, but something in his tone made her pause. "What kind of offer?" she asked, her voice trembling. Victor's smile widened. "The kind that could change your life," he said. "But we don't have much time. So, what's it going to be?" Meanwhile, back at the Kane estate, Alexander was preparing for the final showdown. He knew Victor would make his move soon, and he had to be ready. But as he gathered his resources, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something, some crucial piece of the puzzle that would make everything fall into place. It wasn't until Evelyn walked into the room, her expression unreadable, that he realized what it was. "You're playing a dangerous game, Alexander," she said, her voice calm but laced with an edge of warning. "But you're not the only one with secrets." He turned to face her, his eyes narrowing as he tried to decipher her meaning. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his tone carefully controlled. Evelyn smiled, a cold, knowing smile that sent a chill down his spine. "Victor isn't the only one who's been watching you," she said. "And if you think you can outsmart him without my help, you're sorely mistaken." Alexander's jaw tightened, his mind racing as he tried to piece together what she was saying. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice low and dangerous. Evelyn's smile never wavered. "I want what I've always wanted," she said. "Power. And if you want to survive this, you're going to need me." As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Alexander realized that the game was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. Victor wasn't just a rival. He was a puppet master, pulling strings from behind the scenes. And Evelyn? She was the wild card, the one who could tip the scales in his favor or destroy him completely. But as he stood there, staring into her cold, calculating eyes, he knew that he had no choice. He had to trust her, at least for now. "Fine," he said finally, his voice steady but laced with tension. "But if you betray me, I won't hesitate to take you down with me." Evelyn's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Duly noted," she said. "Now, let's get to work." The final act unfolded in a whirlwind of chaos and tension, each move calculated and each decision carrying the weight of lives and empires. Claire, caught in the crossfire, found herself at the center of a battle she had never asked to be part of. But as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, she realized that she held the key to unraveling the entire scheme. It wasn't just about Alexander or Victor or Evelyn. It was about the truth and the power it held. With Victor's associates closing in and Alexander's team racing against time, Claire made a decision that would change everything. She reached out to Alexander, her voice steady, but laced with urgency as she revealed what she had discovered. "It's not just about the deal," she said. "It's about the people behind it. And if you want to stop them, you're going to need to think bigger." Alexander listened, his mind racing as he pieced together the final fragments of the puzzle. And then, with a clarity he hadn't felt in weeks, he knew what he had to do. The climax came in a flurry of action and revelation, the tension reaching its peak as Alexander and Evelyn confronted Victor in a high-stakes showdown. But just when it seemed like all was lost, Claire stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "It's over," she said, her tone calm but firm. "You've lost." Victor laughed, a cold, bitter laugh that sent a chill through the room. "You think you've won?" he asked, his eyes blazing with fury. "This isn't over." Not by a long shot. But as he turned to leave, he was met by a wall of law enforcement officers, their expressions grim but determined. "Victor Langston," one of them said, his voice steady, "you're under arrest." The look on Victor's face was one of pure shock, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him as the handcuffs clicked into place. But as he was led away, he turned to Alexander, his eyes filled with a mixture of rage and something else, respect. Perhaps, or maybe, just the realization that he had underestimated his opponent. In the aftermath, the dust began to settle, but the scars of the battle would linger for a long time. Alexander stood on the balcony of his penthouse, the city spread out before him like a glittering tapestry. Claire joined him, her presence a quiet comfort in the midst of the chaos. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice soft but laced with curiosity. Alexander sighed, his mind racing as he tried to process everything that had happened. "Now," he said finally, "we rebuild, and we make sure nothing like this ever happens again." Claire nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and determination. "And us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander turned to face her, his expression softening as he reached out to take her hand. "We take it one day at a time," he said. "Because if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that life is too short to waste on games." And as they stood there, hand in hand, watching the sunrise over the city, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The story of the bartender and the tycoon was one of power, secrets, and the choices that define us. But it was also a story of redemption, of finding light in the darkest of places, and of the courage it takes to stand up for what's right. And as the final chapter closed, one thing was clear: sometimes, the most unexpected moments can lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. So, what would you do if you found yourself in Claire's shoes? Would you have the courage to take that risk, to make that move, knowing it could change your life forever? Think about it, because in the end, it's not about the power or the money or the fame. It's about the choices we make and the people we choose to stand beside. And that, more than anything, is what makes life worth living.